So I love talking about this stuff, sometimes more than Reiki itself. This video is about psychokinesis and how it relates to energy work and what it is that people are out there doing now. Reiki, as I've said before, is using your consciousness to tap into the universal energy source, ki, prana, whatever you want to call it, and using it in order to bring about well-being and healing and oneness of your consciousness with that source so that you can have communion and bliss and love flow and radiate throughout your life and all that. Psychokinesis is something that we really associate with strictly the mind. You're using the mind in order to exert will over physical matter, and I think that though we like to gussy up what Reiki is with all these words like universal energy force and this and that, I think ultimately we do all of these things with the mind, and we're using the mind to tune into the universal energy force and then use it to affect what? To affect matter, the matter of a person's physical body. Reiki can be used to treat emotional and mental well-being as well, and it can certainly be used to intend into the future positive outcomes and what we wish to see in our lives. But again, we do all of that with the mind. Now, we don't have a lot of stories of Reiki people going out and performing miracles and things that we don't expect to see with our given knowledge of physics. We just don't have much of us on camera doing this stuff because most of the time Reiki practitioners are either working one-on-one or one with a group trying to teach Reiki, or we're doing private sessions with people focusing on their health. And I've seen plenty of miraculous things come out of those sessions. And I've seen amazing, wondrous things come out of my students, even better than me, about what they can pull off. I've seen asthma be cured. I've seen arthritis get help that doctors said wouldn't come. I've seen cartilage repair, even though doctors say that cartilage isn't supposed to be repaired like that. So those stories are out there anecdotally for us, the Reiki community, but they aren't really known as well as some examples of psychokinesis that are out there in the world. I think 2 or 3 really good examples are these. There's a woman called Nina Kulagina, or Kulagina. She was a woman in Russia who was documented by Russian scientists after she had a habit of performing psychokinetic events at her home for dinner guests. She would use her hands kind of like this in front of objects and get into a type of trance, although she was not unable to communicate with experimenters or with her dinner guests beforehand. Again, she did these performances for friends and family and people of her village as kind of entertainment before Russian officials caught on to her and came to measure her efforts. And I'll leave a link for a video that I think shows that pretty well. There are other examples though, and we do have some here in the West. There are numerous experiments that Westerners ran in the United States in the period mostly from the late 1970s into the mid 1980s, where we experimented with psychokinesis. It wasn't seen as such a sci-fi, I mean it was, but it wasn't seen as such a miraculous thing. Back then they were just trying to figure out if it worked. And they found the United States Army mainly, but also the organization that became PSYOPs, did a lot of experimentation with this. An example that I found when I was about 24 or 25, when I was researching all of this, was one of my favorite, honestly, examples of this, where they took a man from, I think it was Tennessee, and he was a caricature of a Tennessee ranch owner. He had a white coat, he had a big gallon white hat that he stepped off the airplane that the United States Army, I think it was PSYOPs at the time, flew him out there in, and they told this guy to stand in front of an enclosed radioactive isotope that was sending out an electron as part of its decay every so often, and the electron came out at a certain frequency of energy, a certain energy wave that all electrons do. And what they wanted this guy to do was look at the electron that was popping out of the decaying radioactive isotope and cause it to increase frequency, cause it to woo faster. And lo and behold, without much effort on this guy's part, he made it happen. He made that thing go faster. And a really interesting part of this experiment was something that was not part of the experiment at all, but it was when the technicians who were measuring this and the guy they were experimenting with, the guy with the 10-gallon hat, they were all going to lunch. And one of the experimenters asked, just off the top of his head, if the psychic could cause the electron to increase frequency for the period of time it took them to go eat lunch, so like for an hour and a half, and then come back and see if it was still going. And so he started it. It started moving at the increased frequency. They left for lunch, they came back, and it was still going. So that is a example not only of psychic ability and the mind's ability to increase the motion of matter where it wouldn't be otherwise, but it also shows that just the intent of such a person is enough to keep the electron moving even when they're focused on eating their hot dog over in the cafeteria. Another example that comes out of a very famous movie, a relatively famous movie, is The Men Who Stare at Goats with George Clooney. That was based on an actual book that a journalist went around the United States and talked to some of these people who had worked with PSYOPs during Desert Storm and the Iraq War in the 2000s, and documented these men's experiences. And the reason it's called The Men Who Stare at Goats, and the reason the part that gets the most, I think, press out of all of this, even though many people have forgotten it and moved on, was a man who reportedly could look at a goat and cause its heart to stop beating. What isn't really included in the general know-how of this book, if you haven't read it, is that that man actually went into a very deep depression afterwards and lost touch with reality, lost touch with his friends and family, and became a hermit. In fact, it was in that state that he was interviewed by the man who wrote the book. And what he said was to use his ability, this telekinesis that they were studying at PSYOPs, the person using it actually has to, according to this man, has to be in an empathetic state of openness, receptivity, and love. And that, if you're ever wondering, is ultimately why you don't see a lot of psychic warriors on the battlefield telekinetically throwing boulders at enemy battalions, because the end result of what they found through the 80s and then through the restarted experiments that they were running with like interrogation and stuff, and distance viewing in the 2000s, is that in order to use any of these abilities, you have to be in a trance state, and trance states are not something you can get into if you're under extreme duress and stress, like in a battlefield. And indeed, with this guy who stared at the goat, you see that if you get in those deep states where this man said, you're one with the goat, and then betray that by stealing its soul or stealing its life or whatever, it can cause serious reverberations. So all of this together, and combined with my Reiki training and combined with what I know about Reiki, shows me that as we use our soul, our consciousness, to connect to the greater consciousness, the oversoul, we find that as this connection broadens and as we become more receptive to synchronicities and the ways that these energies communicate with us, and we become more a part of that energy as a whole, we slowly gain the ability to alter, our own matter at first, because practicing Reiki and practicing these energy techniques is absolutely phenomenal for the well-being of your body. And eventually, as your consciousness expands outwards, you have the ability to help out with other people's bodies. I think that Reiki, in a way, although healing and although capable of miraculous events, I think it's ultimately sort of just a beginning. And I think that given what I've seen from like Nina Kulagina and others, people like who dowse, who are really good at like dowsing rods or have other mental abilities, many of them don't appear to go into active meditation in order to achieve these feats. And it shows you just how like flow state some of these people with these abilities are. And I mean, I have to meditate a while, at least for a few minutes, to get into the Reiki trance to be able to do all of the healing and the Reiki stuff. But there are some people who do these things who don't really go into mixed states. They just, or different states, they just do these things as a consequence of who they are. Because of that, I have a strong suspicion that there is a genetic component to some of this. So for instance, every human ability, every human activity that we can do has a genetic component, or most of them do, to be able to do something better. And I suspect that it could be that just like you can practice Reiki, or you could practice doing what this man who stared at the goat does and tune into consciousness, you could practice these things, but there also might be people who are just genetically wired to be better at them. I know I've run into a few Reiki students who have picked up Reiki faster in 2 months than it took me 2 years to do. So I have my strong suspicions that there's more than just luck and more than just coincidence in how some of these people are adapting to some of these ideas, and how some people seem to do miraculous feats so easily. What this gets me thinking about, and the reason I threw the word aliens into this video, is that if there is a genetic component to it, and if it simply is a matter of being in tune, and if those two things could coincide, if we could start having people who naturally are more in tune with the energies and with prana and with psychic abilities, like we know some people to be, if more and more people start becoming like that, and then you start throwing genetic variation into the mix, right, then you get to the point where there may be no upper limit to this ability. Yes, it starts with Nina over there in her farmhouse, like showing guests how she can move a matchbox without touching it. But if that's possible, then who knows what is possible, and who knows what the upper limit could be. And indeed, my philosophy about aliens and why we may not be seeing many spacefaring civilizations out in our galaxy or other galaxies, or trans-galaxy hopping, conquering star species that are all over the galaxy, that should be there if we've had billions of years of evolution and only a few variations on how life can happen. I mean, those elements exist all over the place. Where are the aliens? Well, one of the reasons that we don't see them, and one of the reasons there may be no spaceships out there, is because of this idea. This idea that, look, like, if it is possible to move things with your mind, or change physical matter around with a little bit of concentration and a little bit of in-tuneness, then that radically changes how we orient our everything, our economy, our production, our industry, our technology, everything we do. All the electricity that we use depends on something pushing a fan so that that fan can turn a turbine, and that requires fuel, and the need for that fuel dominates the structure of our civilizations, of our world civilization. We're all equally at the mercy of energy limitations. And if those energy limitations can be superseded by something as simple as a thought in a direction that pushes a fan, that turns the turbine, that creates energy, that's revolutionary. And even more so, and this has to do with the alien species, is what if instead of working with metallurgy and trying to create combustion to create energy, like technology with metal, like our species did, what if people were in the hunter-gatherer phase, in the Neolithic phase, genetically or through happenstance started to focus on these abilities instead. If there's no upper limit, then you could get to a point where an entire civilization and all their technology could simply be people moving things with their minds. And over the course of thousands of years, that would become commonplace. Indeed, there would be people who are more genetically apt to be able to do those things. And so if you get to that point where you no longer need to harvest your planet's resources for energy, then there's no energy scarcity and there's no need to go to another planet to get resources. There's no need to go out to asteroid belts or go to moons or go to gas giants to get hydrogen. There's no need to repopulate another planet because you never ruin your planet to begin with because you're not using its resources for energy. You're just using consciousness, your mind, this Reiki, if you want to call it that, and whatever. And for that reason, there may not be any need for anyone to fly off into space to repopulate or recolonize because everything's hunky-dory because they just think it into being. So I have a strong suspicion that as we are evolving and as we are undergoing this huge pressure cooker that we're going through in our civilization in the information age, I wonder if the result of this will be people stepping outside the limits of the imposed consciousness into a more over or collective consciousness, in which case miraculous things that we may not have thought of are possible. And that's where you get people who are experiencing past lives or playing with different forms of romance and sexuality, or playing with different ways of seeing themselves or ways of seeing the universe, different ideas about how to run everything. That's what happens when this consciousness expands. And if that can include something like no longer needing combustion in order to run everything and moving it with our minds, that could drastically change society and to a point where there might not be a need for galactic conquering anymore, or even space travel to begin with. I want to end with a little bit of hope, though, because I truly do believe that mankind is going to be a spacefaring civilization. I think that for some reason in our monkey DNA, we have the urge to explore and be curious, and I don't think that curiosity will be satiated until we start exploring other stars. So I do think we're on our way there, and I think that even if we do discover psychokinetic abilities en masse in our culture, I think we still will have the will and the excitement with us to go out into the stars. And if anything, I think that it could be that we are receiving support from not just the afterlife, but also psychically, even many light years off from some of these alien civilizations who want us to succeed in that. I think it's unlikely that there are other spacefaring civilizations at this moment, at least in our galaxy. And I think that our efforts to put ourselves out into the stars is something to be celebrated, and I think it would be celebrated by many other alien races if they knew we were doing it, because it's just so exciting an idea. And if there's no one else out there, for us to be the first ones out there, it would be good if we were in tune, empathetic, and connected to universal love when we go out there, so that we don't bring those aspects of our consciousness and those aspects of humanity that are the worst into the stars. Let's try to bring our best. So anyway, guys, I'll bring this video to a close. Please like and subscribe. I'd like to get this out to some more people, and I'll see you later. Thanks.